Hello, my name is Abby, and my husband kicked me in front of 300 people at our wedding. But what broke me wasn't the fall, it was the way everyone watched, then clapped like nothing had happened. My sister made jokes about it. My mother said I was being dramatic. And the man I married? He laughed, then handed me a forged prenup I never signed. They planned it all. My dress? Wasn't even ordered for me. I thought I was becoming a wife. Turns out, I was just a cover story. But what happens when the quiet one finally stops playing along? The wind was mild that day, the kind of gentle breeze you wish for during spring weddings in Chicago. From where I stood, under an ivory arch dressed in peonies and eucalyptus, I could see the skyline shimmering behind the crowd. 300 guests filled every seat on the rooftop. Some stood along the sides, dressed like they were attending a political gala, not a wedding. And yet, despite all the sparkle and tailored suits, not a single one of them looked at me. I had been invisible before, at family gatherings, birthdays, even Thanksgiving dinners when Valora would walk into the room and suddenly I'd vanish like smoke, but never like this. Not in my own wedding. I tried to hold myself tall as I waited for the ceremony to begin, heels sinking slightly into the wooden deck, bouquet trembling just enough that I tucked it closer. My dress was perfect, or so they'd told me. Truth was, it wasn't the one I picked. But when I showed up to my final fitting, the boutique manager smiled awkwardly and said, "Oh, your sister said you changed your mind." I hadn't. Still, I'd nodded, tried it on, and smiled for the pictures, because I was used to swallowing things. That was the role of the youngest daughter. You absorb, you make peace, you stay quiet. The music swelled. The violinist began her solo and the chatter dimmed. Colton was already waiting near the altar. He looked handsome, polished, like someone who belonged on the cover of a magazine. So much so, I had to remind myself he was mine, supposedly. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the voice of the officiant, a family friend I barely knew. "Today, we gather to celebrate love, unity, and a new beginning." I listened. I smiled. I glanced at my mother. She was crying. Not for me, for Valora, who was now giving a speech. No one told me Valora would be giving a speech during my wedding ceremony. She stood with the poise of a newscaster, mic in hand, wearing a navy blue gown that outshone every bridesmaid's. "Growing up with Abby was like having a diary you could ignore," she began. Quiet, sweet, always there, but never loud enough to distract. People chuckled. I did not. "She never asked for attention," Valora went on, "which worked out well, since I've always had enough for both of us." Laughter again, louder this time. I heard my uncle slap his knee. My cheeks burned, but I smiled. What else could I do? Ruin the wedding. I reached for Colton's hand. He didn't even look at me. When the officiant finally got control again, it was only to announce another speaker, Loretta. My mother. She went on about God's timing, marriage being a covenant, and how proud she was of this new chapter, but never once said my name. She said Colton's 5 times. The only time she turned to me was when she adjusted the strap on my dress mid-sentence, like I was a mannequin. "My daughter's always been more sensitive," she told the audience, like an apology. But thank goodness she found someone strong enough to lead. There were nods. One woman in the front row clapped, and I smiled again, like I meant it. Eventually, the vows came and went. I recited mine with a tight throat, barely hearing Colton's. His were short. One line. "I'll make her better than she is." My stomach dropped. Nobody flinched. Nobody blinked. The kiss was brief, dry and staged, but we smiled for the cameras. Then came the first dance. Colton held my waist with 2 fingers, the way someone handles raw chicken. He leaned in. I thought he might whisper something kind. "She talks too much," he said loud enough for people near us to hear. "Now they all see what I deal with." Then, he pushed me. Hard. My heel caught on the wooden slat. My body tilted like a toppling statue. My hand tried to grip the air, and I fell, dress tangled, elbow scraped, flowers sprawled. He stepped forward, not to help me up, but to press his foot lightly against the edge of my gown as if to keep me down. A few chuckled, not all, but enough. From the floor, I saw a camera phone light blink red. I waited for someone to gasp. for the music to stop, for my father to shout. Nothing. The DJ just restarted the music, a Marvin Gaye classic. The crowd clapped. Colton walked away. I got up on my own, straightened my dress, picked up what was left of the bouquet. My knees shook. But my face? Smiling. Always smiling. The MC acted like it hadn't happened. "Let's give it up for the newlyweds!" They cheered. I made my way off the floor slowly. My fingers dug into the bouquet stems so tightly the petals began to bruise. Behind the curtain, the laughter muffled. I stood alone. Then, my fingers loosened. My bouquet slid to the ground. My hands shook, but my face, still frozen. That was when I saw her. Valora. Standing just behind the curtain, fixing the veil on one of the bridesmaids. She looked up, saw me, and smiled like nothing happened. Valora's hands moved delicately through the tulle, smoothing my veil with the precision of someone rehearsed in appearances. Her lips pulled into that perfect, calculated smile, the kind that never quite touched her eyes. "I fixed it," she said, like we weren't standing in the shadow of what had just happened. "It slipped a little when you fell." I stared at her, my lips slightly parted. I wasn't sure what shocked me more, that she was pretending nothing happened or that she assumed I would. "I didn't fall," I said, more to myself than to her. She blinked once, slow and patronizing. "Accidents happen, sis. Don't overthink it. You looked beautiful, by the way. Everyone was talking about it." "Right," I whispered. She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring no one else was within earshot. "Let it go, Abby. Don't ruin your own wedding by being dramatic." That word, dramatic, hung in the air like smoke. Valora had been using it to describe me since we were teenagers. Anytime I cried, anytime I disagreed, anytime I had the audacity to take up space, she'd say it softly, like a kindness, but I knew better. As she flitted away like nothing was wrong, I stood frozen in place. For a second, I could feel my 9-year-old self again, elbows skinned from falling off the bike she accidentally nudged, her voice echoing in my ears. "She's always clumsy, Mom." And Mom had believed her then, too. I stepped back from the curtain, my hands trembling slightly, and tried to breathe through the weight pressing on my chest. The music from the reception floated in, bright and empty. Moments later, my mother appeared. Loretta, tall, elegant in a champagne silk gown that probably cost more than the photographer. She looked me over with narrowed eyes, adjusting the strap on my shoulder with quick fingers like I was a doll out of place. "You're fine," she said. "It wasn't as bad as you think." "He pushed me." She paused. "He's under stress. So are you. Weddings do that. Just be gracious, honey." "Be gracious?" My voice cracked. She sighed, clearly annoyed at my inability to perform properly. "You're the youngest, Abby. You've always been more sensitive. That's why it's even more important you rise above moments like these. Don't give people something to gossip about." "He embarrassed me in front of everyone," I said, more firmly now. "You saw it." Loretta pressed her lips together. What I saw was a man overwhelmed by the moment and a bride who stumbled. People will remember your reaction more than the fall itself. So smile, hug, dance, be the wife you're supposed to be. There it was again, the reminder that I existed in this family as a background role, not the star. Not even the supporting act, just set dressing. "You told me marriage was about respect." "And it is," she replied quickly, "but it's also about patience, compromise, timing." I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because fighting her was like punching mist. You'd never win, you'd only tire yourself out. By the time I returned to the main floor, the sun had begun to sink below the rooftops, casting golden light through the tall glass windows. The clinking of silverware and champagne glasses filled the air. People laughed, posed for photos, moved on like nothing had happened. I stood at the edge of the room, unseen. Valora was entertaining a circle of guests with a story about her latest podcast appearance. Colton's father was deep in conversation with 2 bankers from Michigan. My aunt asked someone to refill her white wine. No one noticed the torn lace near the bottom of my dress. I spotted my father, or thought I did, but then realized it was just someone with the same build. He hadn't come to check on me. Or maybe he had, and decided not to. I made my way to a quiet side hallway behind the catering station. The corridor was dim, lined with folding chairs and trays of untouched desserts. I sat down, alone, my back against the wall. The buzz of the crowd softened behind the walls. For a moment, all I heard was the thump of my heartbeat and the soft rustle of fabric as I tried to get comfortable in a dress meant to impress everyone but me. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking. From the cold. From humiliation. From a lifetime of letting everyone else define what I should feel. All I knew was that something inside me had cracked. Not loudly, but like a hairline fracture in glass that would soon spread. I looked around for something, anything, that felt mine. The bouquet was gone. My clutch, misplaced. Even my nameplate at the head table had been printed with my middle name misspelled, Abigail, instead of Abby. If I didn't matter today, I probably never did. I got out of bed around 3:15 in the morning. I hadn't really been sleeping, more like drifting in and out, body still and eyes wide open. The room felt unfamiliar, even though it was labeled the honeymoon suite. Too white. Too quiet. The city's hum outside the window was the only reminder I hadn't slipped into some padded version of my own nightmare. I sat at the edge of the bed, hands resting on my knees, looking down at my wedding ring. It was a thin band, delicate. Colton had picked it. I remember smiling when he showed it to me, but not because I loved it. I smiled because he wanted me to. That had become a pattern, I realized. Smiling when expected, agreeing when convenient. I got up, quietly made my way across the room to the small desk where I'd tossed the folder Valora gave me after the reception. She'd said it was a keepsake collection. Photos, little notes, the marriage certificate, and a copy of the prenup. I hadn't opened it earlier. Not because I forgot, because I was afraid I wouldn't like what I found. Now I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. I opened the folder. The photos were in there, out of focus, rushed. A wrinkled napkin from the cake table. One of the escort cards with Colton's name misspelled as Cloten. I almost laughed at that one. And then I saw it. A single sheet of paper with our signatures and a gold seal at the bottom. The prenup. I held it up to the light and studied my name. The signature looked strange, too perfect, not rushed like I remembered signing it. I didn't even recall seeing this final version. My chest tightened. Grabbing my laptop from the suitcase nearby, I sat back down and opened the cloud folder I used to store all my legal docs. It took a few minutes of digging, but I finally found the earlier draft. I laid the two versions side by side. The differences were subtle, but critical. In the original, I retained joint access to any real estate purchased during the marriage. I had clauses about intellectual property, even a section that protected assets I had from my mother's estate. In this new version, those parts were gone. Instead, there was language that placed financial control solely under Colton's name. A line read, Spouse A forfeits future claims on assets unless reassigned by Spouse B. My mouth went dry. Who the hell changes a legal document without telling their partner? I reread it. Then again. Then I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. My thoughts spun back to the moment Colton pushed me during the first dance, how casual it was, how prepared he seemed, as if that entire evening had been orchestrated not to celebrate our union, but to humiliate me into silence. And Valora, she handed me the folder. She knew. She had to. I shut the folder and stood up too fast. My knees nearly gave out. I grabbed the back of the chair to steady myself. The sun had just begun to rise. A sliver of light pierced through the sheer curtains and fell across the rug like a silent witness. I couldn't stay in the room any longer. I needed fresh air. I needed answers. After grabbing my coat and changing out of my nightgown, I left a note for the front desk saying I'd be back later. I wasn't ready for questions. Outside, the city hadn't quite woken up yet. The streets were quiet. I walked a few blocks before finding a cafe that had just opened. I ordered tea I didn't drink and sat long enough to check the email confirmations from the bridal boutique. I didn't know what I expected to find, some trail, some hint, but my gut told me the dress story wasn't over either. I finished my tea and called a rideshare. The boutique was on the north side, about 20 minutes away with light traffic. I watched the streets roll past in silence, clutching my phone like it could explain things I hadn't yet dared to ask. The boutique manager greeted me with forced cheer. She was polite but clearly confused as to why a newlywed bride would show up unannounced the morning after her wedding. I just needed to confirm something about the dress, I said. Do you have the original order on file? She looked hesitant. Well, technically, your sister handled most of the communication. But let me check. She disappeared into the back room. While I waited, one of the younger assistants came over. She looked to be in her early 20s, maybe a fashion student. She smiled, genuine and curious. That's a beautiful gown, she said, motioning to the photo on my phone. Thanks, I replied. It didn't feel like mine, to be honest. Her head tilted. Yeah, that style was originally ordered for someone else. We almost didn't put it back out. I looked up sharply. Sorry? Oh, she said quickly, suddenly unsure. I mean, it was supposed to be for another client, Sable, but she never picked it up, so we just repurposed the order. Sable. The name hit me like ice water. The bridesmaid. The woman who barely spoke to me but always managed to stand next to Colton. The one Valora invited without asking me. I tried to keep my expression neutral. That's helpful. Thank you. The manager returned, confirming what I now knew. The order had originally been placed in Sable's name, but Valora signed the final receipt. I thanked them both and stepped outside. The city was fully awake now. Cars honking, people rushing, dogs barking at pigeons. But in my world, everything was quiet. Deafeningly so. Walking back toward the hotel, I started seeing scenes from the past few months in a different light. The quick glances between Colton and Sable. The way Valora always seemed too involved in my choices. The last-minute changes passed off as upgrades or corrections. They had built this wedding on top of a lie. I was just the one too trusting to see it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But inside me, something settled. Not despair. Not yet. Conviction. After I texted myself that line, I stayed in the quiet for a while, phone still in my hand, the glow of the screen reflecting against the glass of the hotel window. The sky had shifted, still early morning, but no longer the hopeful blue I usually liked. It had a gray tint, like everything was holding its breath. By the time I returned to the bridal suite, Colton was gone. A note was left on the nightstand next to his untouched cufflinks. Gone to get coffee with the guys. See you at brunch. It wasn't the absence that unsettled me, it was the normalcy of the note. The fact that he could act like nothing was unraveling, like he didn't kick me in front of a crowd, like we hadn't signed a contract I now knew had been doctored, like this whole weekend wasn't layered in lies. Brunch was scheduled for 11:30 at the rooftop of the same hotel. Everyone who attended the wedding was invited. I took my time getting ready. I wasn't dressing to impress anyone. I was dressing to observe. I chose a simple navy wrap dress, one Valora had criticized for being a little too plain for a celebration, and pulled my hair back into a low bun. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't need a mask today. When I arrived, Valora was already holding court near the mimosa bar. She wore a jumpsuit that sparkled like it needed its own spotlight. Every person she passed smiled at her like she was royalty. Colton was laughing at a table with his best man and Sable. There she was, again, in white, of all colors, a white linen halter top and matching slacks. My eyes narrowed as I watched her place her hand on Colton's shoulder. It wasn't flirty, it was possessive. They laughed at something too quietly for me to hear. When I approached, Sable spotted me first. Her smile didn't falter. Instead, she leaned in toward Colton and whispered something. He looked up at me, smile still plastered on, then stood like a perfect gentleman. Hey, babe, he said, as if nothing had ever been off. You sleep okay? I've had better nights. He nodded, brushing off the tension like it was lint. Let's make the most of today, all right? Behind him, Sable gave me a slow blink. Not a wink, not a smirk. Just a blink. The kind that says, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and you're late to the truth. Valora floated over as I walked toward the buffet, placing her hand gently on my arm like we were close. Don't make a scene, Abby, she whispered, her voice low but edged. This brunch is for everyone, not your little spiral. I'm not spiraling, I said. I'm watching, she blinked. Whatever that means. Halfway through the event, Colton's grandmother, Miriam, signaled for me to join her at a corner table. She wasn't the warmest woman I'd ever met, but she was honest in a way the rest of them weren't. She had a history of saying what others were too polite or too political to admit. You need to know something, Abby, she said without preamble. I leaned in. I'm listening. She sipped her black coffee. No sugar, no milk, just like her tone. He's not marrying you for love. He's marrying you because it cleans up a mess. My breath hitched, but I didn't let it show. What mess? I asked. Miriam tilted her head, observing me. You already know. Deep down, you've always known. But since you want specifics, ask Sable or Loretta. They'll lie better than I do, but they won't be able to hide their eyes. I didn't respond right away. My heart beat faster, but I nodded. Thank you. She waved a hand. Don't thank me. Just don't be foolish. After that, I kept my distance. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I watched. Later, as I passed through one of the side hallways near the restrooms, I heard voices. One male, one female. Familiar tones. I slowed my steps. I told you this would work, Sable said. We're not doing this now, Colton replied, agitated. Why? Because your wife might walk in? She scoffed. She's not stupid, Colton. She knows. That's not the point. I turned the corner slowly. They both looked up at the same time. Colton straightened his posture immediately. We were just talking about the honeymoon logistics. Sable tilted her head and smiled. Yeah, room upgrades. You know. I didn't say anything. I just held Colton's gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, then turned and walked away. That evening, I couldn't stop replaying every moment of the last few months. The time Colton canceled dinner to work late, only to tag Sable in a photo the next day. The text Valora once accidentally sent to me, don't worry, she won't make waves. Even the engagement party, where Colton's best man had toasted, glad you moved on so fast, man, she's a catch. Everyone laughed. I laughed. But now, the weight of that comment pressed heavy against my chest. They didn't think I was the first choice, because I wasn't. I was the fallback plan, the cleanup crew. I opened my phone and created a new note. I typed, I need evidence. If this was a transaction, I want the receipt. Then I set my phone down, walked to the mirror, and looked myself in the eye. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken. She was preparing for war. I stared at the phone for a long time after I sent the message. It wasn't even a long one, just a short, simple ask. Hey Donna, can I call you? She had been my best friend since college. Late-night ramen, heartbreaks, shared rides when we couldn't afford cabs. We'd been through every version of our adult selves together. If anyone was going to tell me I wasn't crazy, I thought it would be her. But 3 hours passed before I got a reply. I don't want to be in the middle of anything messy. You know I love you, but... That but felt like a blade to the chest. But you're alone now. But I'm choosing them. But don't expect me to lose comfort to stand beside you. I didn't text back. Instead, I closed the app and opened another. My cloud drive. If no one else was going to stand up with me, I'd stand up for myself. I'd start with the files. The paper trail. The wedding planner had emailed me all the invoices weeks before, but I hadn't looked closely. Valora said she was handling it all, and frankly, I was so exhausted by the endless notes and revisions that I let her. Now I opened each attachment one by one. The catering bill, $23,600. Paid by credit card. The floral arrangements, $7,800. Wire transfer. The venue deposit, paid in full by Loretta's account, but the contact name listed, Valora M. Reynolds. Even the final payment for my wedding gown, placed under Event Management, V. Reynolds. My stomach flipped. She hadn't just helped, she had claimed the whole event. And then I found the post. It was on her public Facebook profile, already shared over 200 times, with dozens of "so proud of you" comments below. Nothing brings me more joy than giving my baby sister the wedding of her dreams. A day to remember, full of love, laughter, and legacy. There was even a photo of me, at the altar, eyes wide, Colton beside me like he was posing for a cover. She had taken the moment I should have owned and wrapped it in her own ribbon. I stared at that screen until my vision blurred. Then I got up and walked to the kitchen, pulled a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water. I didn't drink it. I just needed to hold something. Half an hour later, I called Aunt Mallory. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, sweetheart, how's the newlywed glow?" "No glow," I said. "Do you have a minute?" Her tone changed. "Of course." I was looking through the invoices and saw Valora's name all over the payments. I thought Mom paid for some of it. "She did," Aunt Mallory said softly. "But Valora insisted on being the point of contact, said you were overwhelmed. Your mom thought it was easier that way. Did anyone think to ask me?" There was a pause. "No, Abby." I guess they didn't. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my voice even. "Why does everyone treat me like I'm incapable?" "Because you let them," she said gently. The next morning, I stopped by Loretta's house. She wasn't expecting me, which made it easier. She opened the door in one of her pressed pastel robes, hair already curled. "Well, this is a surprise." I walked in. She didn't offer coffee. "I saw the invoices," I said. "I know you paid for most of it, but why does Valora's name appear as if she sponsored the whole thing?" Loretta gave a dismissive wave. "Because you didn't handle it well, Abby. You were late on deadlines. You kept second-guessing yourself. She stepped up." "She stepped over me," I said. She narrowed her eyes. "Don't take that tone." "What tone? The one that doesn't come with a smile and a thank you card?" "Abby, no. I let this family talk over me my entire life. I nodded when I wanted to scream. I apologized when I was the one bleeding. You raised me to think that silence was dignity. It's not." Her lip quivered for a second, barely. "Are you done?" she asked. "For now." I left before I said something I'd regret. Though truth be told, I didn't know what regret looked like anymore. Everything was just a muted shade of betrayal. When I got back to the suite, I sat on the bed and opened a new folder on my computer. I titled it Truth. Inside it, I created subfolders. Prenup, receipts, social, messages. I began saving screenshots, emails, anything that might be helpful later. If they wanted to paint me as the confused bride, they'd better prepare to be exposed as the ones who handed me the brush and then blamed me for the painting. I typed a note into a document. "They want me quiet. I'll let them talk themselves into ruin." That evening, as the sun began to sink below the horizon and a golden hue filled the hotel room, a notification appeared on my screen, one I didn't expect. Unauthorized access attempt detected in Prenup Backup Archive. I froze. Someone had tried to open the folder I had locked behind two-factor authentication and an encrypted password. My heart pounded as I traced the IP address, only partially available. Chicago. Close. Recent. I sat there, still as stone. So now they weren't just lying, they were getting nervous. It was still early when I stepped out of the elevator into the hotel's lobby, but the air was already buzzing with the kind of artificial calm that high-end places use to mask tension. A man in a charcoal suit offered a polite nod as I passed the concierge, who smiled without recognition. I wasn't dressed like a bride anymore. No veil, no fake smile. Just a dark trench coat and flats that didn't click against the marble. I had made the appointment over the phone under my maiden name, and that seemed to help. I was shown to the guest services office on the mezzanine level, where the hotel manager, middle-aged, efficient, polite, greeted me with professional reserve. "You're asking for surveillance footage from a week ago?" he asked, typing something into his computer. Do you have legal reason? I slid a copy of my marriage license across the desk, then added the photo I'd taken of Colton's email confirming his meeting with their in-house legal counsel. I believe this will clarify it, I said, voice steady. There was a conversation held in your lounge area between my husband, his lawyer, and a third party, my mother. I'm requesting access to the audio and video from that afternoon. He looked from the documents to me, then back again. May I ask why? I inhaled. Because I have reason to believe I was defrauded into signing a revised prenuptial agreement I never saw. That changed his tone. 10 minutes later, I was seated in a private viewing room behind the office. The screen blinked to life, and I watched as three familiar figures entered the lounge area on screen. Colton, sharp and composed in a tailored jacket. Loretta, in pearls and lipstick. And a man in a gray suit who looked exactly like the smug voice I had overheard on speakerphone 2 weeks ago. The audio quality was surprisingly clear, enough to catch Colton saying, "She won't know the difference. The signature looks close enough. Just get her to sign it after brunch." Then Loretta, sipping from a champagne flute. "She's distracted. The dress fittings, the seating chart nonsense. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her." Finally, the lawyer. "Once she signs this version, everything shifts. Let the dress distract her." I paused the video, hands trembling but eyes dry. And I watched the timestamp, then downloaded the footage onto a hotel-issued USB drive. The manager didn't ask questions as he handed me a signed authorization of release. If anything, he looked apologetic. I stepped out of the hotel with the USB clutched tightly in my coat pocket. The streets had filled up by now, buses rumbling past, people with coffee cups and earbuds moving like ants. But my body moved with purpose, like a woman walking through fog who had finally found the edge. That afternoon, I returned to my suite, locked the door, and opened my laptop. As I organized files into digital folders, my phone buzzed. It was Junie. Junie, my 12-year-old niece. Sweet, too observant for her own good, always drawing or sneaking cookies into her room. The message was short. "I know I'm not supposed to, but I saw this in Dad's phone. Don't be mad." Attached was a screenshot from a family group chat. There I was, frozen mid-fall on the dance floor. My dress twisted. My arm outstretched. A meme caption above the image read, "Oscar-worthy." It had been sent by Valora. Below it, Colton's brother had replied, "She should have been a theater major." My lungs constricted. Then Junie's follow-up message. "You looked so pretty, Auntie. They're mean." I didn't cry. I printed the screenshot, labeled it, and filed it under social proof. I backed up the folder to 2 separate clouds and a password-protected drive. I changed my phone's SIM card, got a new number, and created an encrypted email just for legal correspondence. At 4:15 that day, I called a law office I'd researched earlier. I didn't ask if they could help. I told them I had evidence of prenup fraud and intentional emotional distress, and I needed representation immediately. They called back within the hour. We scheduled a consultation for Wednesday. That evening, I sat on the couch, laptop on my knees, and looked at a spreadsheet of Colton's known company accounts, the media firm he partially owned, the real estate project his name was tied to. I noted it all. Then I opened a browser tab for the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. The fraud investigator form stared back at me. I filled it out line by line, careful with my words. When I hit submit, something in me clicked into place. Not anger, not revenge, control. By nightfall, I had written a list of every person who would be hearing from me or my lawyer. Colton's company HR rep, his business partner, the planner who had changed my prenup meeting last minute, the financial advisor who once said he just forwarded what Colton wanted. This wasn't about burning bridges anymore. It was about drawing maps. At 9:32 p.m., after hours of organizing and copying files, I shut my laptop. I sat for a moment in the dark. Then I whispered aloud, to no one, and yet to all of them. If this was just a wedding, then I'm just getting started. The envelope was thick, a manila folder with my name written in sharp, confident strokes, delivered by a courier who wouldn't make eye contact. I signed his tablet with a hand that didn't shake, thanked him with a nod, then shut the door quietly behind me. It was early afternoon. I hadn't yet poured my second cup of coffee, but this moment didn't need caffeine. It jolted me wide awake. I opened the envelope on the kitchen counter, slicing the top carefully like a surgeon working on scar tissue. The cover letter was on expensive stationery, cream-colored, embossed. The header read, Perkins Row, Legal Counsel for Mr. Colton Hargrave. I skimmed the first paragraph, then the next. A cease and desist for defamation, harassment, damaging his reputation. Demand for removal of all published footage of the wedding reception, including, of course, the moment he kicked me to the floor like I was gum under his shoe. They wanted a retraction, a public apology, the kind of document meant to silence women who don't shut up when they're told. I folded the paper neatly, walked to the sink, and laid it down. I didn't tear it, didn't throw it, just left it there like it was already starting to rot. I took a sip of cold coffee, then picked up my phone. My lawyer answered on the first ring. Abby, I was just drafting a motion for protective relief, but if this is urgent, he served me, I said. Cease and desist. He's claiming defamation. There was a beat. Then, that man's either arrogant or scared. Both, I replied. Good, let's use it. That call only took 9 minutes, but what followed took hours to plan. By evening, I'd reserved the small conference hall at the Eastwood Community Center, neutral ground, enough parking, a projector, good acoustics, folding chairs I could arrange with intention. I titled the event Family Clarity Session. I sent invitations to both sides, no details, just a message that said, one time, one voice, truth. Loretta responded in under 15 minutes. Why now, Abby? Can't we just heal and move forward? Colton didn't reply. Valora Hart reacted the message. I took that as a yes. I spent the next 24 hours preparing. I didn't rehearse what I'd say, just how I'd say it. Calm, clear, one breath at a time. I printed copies of the forged prenup, enlarged the CCTV screenshots, and trimmed the viral clip to show only what mattered. Not the chaos, just the cruelty. The morning of the meeting, I wore navy slacks and a soft gray blouse. No jewelry, no perfume, just me. The room filled quickly. People murmured, confused, glancing at one another like they were at a funeral without knowing who died. Valora sat, front row, arms crossed, legs perfectly aligned. Loretta hovered near the back, next to Aunt Mallory, who gave me a short nod. Colton arrived 5 minutes late. Sable wasn't with him, but his lawyer was. The same man from the hotel video. Slick smile, silk tie, the kind of presence that slithers. I stepped up to the podium. I'm not here to scream, I began, or cry, or ask for sympathy. The room fell silent. I'm here to tell the truth, one time, and let the facts speak louder than my name ever has in this family. I nodded to the tech volunteer, who dimmed the lights and played the first video. The footage from the hotel lounge played on the screen. Loretta's voice rang out clearly. She's distracted. The dress fittings, the seating chart nonsense, she'll sign whatever we put in front of her. Colton followed. Once she signs the version we bring, everything shifts. Let the dress distract her. A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd. The second clip played, the dance floor, my fall, my twisted dress, his foot. Laughter from the wedding crowd echoed faintly, but not in this room. Then came the meme, projected larger than life. Oscar-worthy. My voice broke the silence. This was sent by Valora, shared in the family group chat. My niece saw it, sent it to me, because she knew no one else would. I moved to the final slide, side-by-side scans of the original prenup and the altered one, signatures overlaid, fonts inconsistent, dates mismatched. I didn't sign this version. I was never shown it, but I was married into it. Colton stood, mouth half open. This is out of context. Speak to my lawyer, I said. I'm not debating lies anymore. Loretta shifted in her chair. Valora stared ahead, blinking hard. No one else moved. I looked around the room, one person at a time. Most avoided my gaze. Some didn't know where to look. I'm not here for revenge, I said. I'm here for truth. And it's about time truth sat at the head of the table. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't wait for apology. I clicked the remote one last time and left the projector frozen on the signature. Mine and the forged one, side by side, with a timestamp glowing in the corner. Then I turned, picked up my coat, and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. By 7:30 a.m., I was already standing outside the Cook County Clerk's office. The morning air was crisp, brisk enough to sting the lungs with each breath, but not enough to freeze you in place. I welcomed the sting. It reminded me I was still standing. I wore a navy suit, the same one I'd worn to my mother's retirement ceremony years ago. Back then, I stood in the audience, clapping like everyone else while Valora gave the toast. Today, I wasn't clapping. I was here to speak. I stepped through the glass doors, past the metal detectors, and made my way to the Family Law Division. My lawyer, Monica Everett, met me at the entrance of courtroom 402. She gave a firm nod, no smile, just mutual readiness. "We'll file the motion for annulment this morning," she said quietly as we walked together down the corridor. "Based on fraud, coercion, and concealed contractual alterations, we'll also request an itemized audit of the wedding expenses tied to your mother's estate and Valora's claimed sponsorship." I nodded. "And the footage?" "Filed with the evidence packet, both hard copy and encrypted drive." She paused just before we reached the door. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready since the moment he pushed me," I said. Inside the courtroom, the rows of wooden benches were already half filled. Not by strangers. By family. My father sat on the left, eyes fixed on his lap. Loretta was beside him, stiff, unreadable. Valora arrived fashionably late, gliding into the room with sunglasses on, like this was some red carpet deposition. Colton walked in with his attorney, and, to my complete lack of surprise, a hired publicist. Clean suit, gelled hair, facial expression rehearsed for sympathy. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense posture and a voice like gravel, entered at 8:02 sharp. "Court is now in session." Introductions were brief. Then it was my turn. Monica guided me to the witness stand. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. I had spoken in rooms where no one listened. This one, at least, couldn't interrupt me without legal consequence. I spoke clearly. "I'm here to request annulment based on fraudulent marriage. The man I married, Mr. Colton Hargrave, conspired with my mother, Loretta Manning, and a third-party legal advisor to substitute a prenuptial agreement I never read, never approved, and never signed in its final form. This substituted document stripped me of any financial protection and gave him full control over joint assets." I turned slightly, meeting Colton's eyes. He didn't flinch. I continued. "I was told to sign it quickly, between dress fittings and guest lists. My mother downplayed it. My sister ignored it. I did what I always did. I trusted them." I gestured to the screen as the video was played, just the clip of the hotel lounge. Colton's voice was unmistakable. "Once she signs the version we bring, everything shifts. Let the dress distract her." The judge lifted her brow. She turned to Colton's lawyer. "Your client care to explain that?" He stood. "Your Honor, these statements were taken out of context. My client—" "This isn't a debate," the judge snapped. "This is a declaration." She faced me again. "Continue." I showed the footage of the reception, only the part where he pushed me, then the meme, then the overlaid signatures of both prenup versions. By the time I finished, you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. Monica handed over the hard copies of the altered documents. Then the judge leaned back in her chair. "I've seen plenty of manipulations in my years on this bench," she said slowly. "But this shows intent, coordination, exploitation of familial trust." She turned to Colton. "Mr. Hargrave, do you have anything meaningful to say before I rule?" Colton stood, cleared his throat. "She's emotional. She's misinterpreting." The judge raised her hand. "Sit down." He did. "I hereby grant annulment on the grounds of fraud and coercion," she said. "In addition, Mr. Hargrave is ordered to reimburse the plaintiff for the total cost of the wedding and pay damages for emotional distress." She glanced toward Loretta. "Miss Manning, if you were not the acting legal authority, I suggest you retain your own counsel in case of further investigation." I held up my hand. "I won't pursue criminal charges," I said. The judge's eyes narrowed. Why not? Because they'd spin it, I replied. They'd say I wanted revenge. All I ever wanted was the truth to be louder than their lies. The judge nodded. Request noted. Court adjourned. I stood slowly, packed my folder, and walked out before anyone could speak to me. The hallway outside was colder than it had been earlier. My breath fogged in the air. A local reporter approached as I stepped out the front doors. Not aggressive, just curious. Abby Manning, she said. Do you have a comment on today's ruling? I looked past the cameras, past the people waiting for a reaction. I smiled, but this time it was mine. I feel like a woman who finally married the truth. The window seat overlooked the Rockies, majestic, snow-dusted, their jagged peaks cutting through the low-slung clouds like silver blades. The landscape felt distant but alive, ancient and unshaken, like it had been here long before me and would remain long after. I pressed my forehead gently to the cool plane of glass, closed my eyes for a moment, and exhaled, not a sob, not a sigh born of grief or drama, but the kind of breath that only comes when your body finally understands it doesn't have to brace anymore. 2 weeks had passed since the courthouse, since the truth, since I stood in front of strangers and cameras and ghosts and peeled back years of silence. I hadn't packed much, just a single checked suitcase, a laptop, and a small box of keepsakes, items that didn't carry anyone else's fingerprints. No wedding photos, no name change certificates, no diamond rings tucked away in velvet boxes, only things that felt like me, stripped of expectations, obligations, and the curated illusions of a life I was never meant to wear. When the plane touched down in Boulder, the air felt thinner, lighter, sharper. It filled my lungs like permission. I rented a tiny apartment above a florist on a quiet side street. The shop below smelled like damp soil and eucalyptus, and when they opened each morning, the scent drifted up through the floorboards like a balm. It was a welcome change from the sterile, perfumed air of Chicago's boardrooms, hotel suites, and high-rise elevators. For the first few days, I barely left. I didn't feel stuck. I felt still, and that was new. I moved through the space slowly, not because I was exhausted, but because I didn't have to hurry anymore. I had no one to perform for, no meetings to attend, no emails that couldn't wait. The silence didn't feel ominous here. It wasn't a reminder of what had been lost. It felt respectful, like it knew how hard I'd fought to get to it. On the third morning, I walked down the block to a leasing office and signed a 6-month rental agreement for a studio above an old bookshop. It was tucked on the corner of a quiet street near the foothills, with large windows that caught the morning light just right. When I filled out the paperwork, I paused at the name field. Abby Elaine, not Manning, not Hargrave, just Elaine. It wasn't about hiding. It wasn't even about starting over. It was about returning to something, to someone. A version of me that existed before court transcripts and scandalized headlines and carefully worded legal statements, before the stage lights, before the edits. Back at the apartment, I pulled out a fresh notebook from my bag. It was soft-backed, with recycled pages and a fabric spine. I turned to the first blank page and wrote a single word at the top. Stillroot. I'd whispered that name to myself for years, back when dreams still felt like possibilities and not liabilities. It was what I always imagined I'd call my own shop. A place filled with potted herbs, succulents, dried lavender bunches, and wild greenery strung across ceiling beams. A space that felt grounded, alive, quiet, but never small. Within days, I found it. A storefront with dusty windows, cracked tile floors, and a charm that hadn't yet been stripped away by over-renovation. It sat on the corner lot of a sleepy street, next to a coffee shop and across from a public park. The building's owner, Deb, was a retired schoolteacher with a sharp wit and kind eyes. She told me she was ready to let go of the space, said she liked the way I carried myself, said I felt steady. I'm trying, I told her. We shook hands. The inside needed work. Nothing tragic, just years of wear that needed love. The paint was faded, the walls scuffed, and the lighting inconsistent. But it was honest. I painted it myself over the course of a week, humming along to Nina Simone and Billie Holiday. I hung string lights around the windows, cleaned the counters, and set out crates on the sidewalk for plants that could brave the chilly mornings. Stillroot opened on a Tuesday. There was no launch party, no PR emails, no hashtags or influencer campaigns, just a chalkboard sign propped against the wall and the scent of rosemary trailing out the door. My first customer was a college student who bought a cactus for his girlfriend. He said she had a habit of killing every plant she touched and hoped the cactus might be unkillable. My second customer was an older woman who wandered in and asked softly if I sold basil. She said her late husband used to grow it on their windowsill every spring. "Not yet," I replied, "but come back Friday." That night, I ordered 3 basil starters from a local nursery. Days slipped gently into one another. I took long walks in the early morning, wrapped in wool and quiet thoughts. I made simple meals: lentils, eggs, toast, tea. I stopped pouring wine at sunset and started watching it with a blanket instead. My phone rarely rang. When it did, it was either Deb checking in or Junie, sending another crayon masterpiece via text. And then came the letter. Friday morning. Slipped under my door like a secret not meant to be shared out loud. The handwriting was instantly familiar, neat, calculated, almost hesitant. "I hope you'll forgive us one day. Your father says hello." No return address. I didn't open it further. I didn't need to. I'd memorized enough of that handwriting in my life to know when someone was trying to say something without saying everything. I placed the letter in the drawer beside my bed, next to a few postcards and a pair of vintage earrings my mother once wore to every church function. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a gift you handed out like candy on Halloween. It was something you earned from yourself, first, and that kind of grace had a timeline all its own. That afternoon, while watering the hanging baskets of mint and thyme outside the shop, the mailman passed again. He stopped this time, smiled, and handed me a bright yellow envelope with bold bubble letters drawn in red. Inside was a folded piece of purple construction paper. On the front, a stick figure version of me stood tall in front of a courthouse, arms outstretched, a bright red cape fluttering behind me. The building had American flags drawn with too many stars. Above the figure, written in marker, were 2 words: "My hero." It was from Junie. I sat down right there on the front step, the envelope resting in my lap, and cried. Not from pain, but from the release. A cry that tasted like salt and eucalyptus and sun-warmed concrete. A cry that said, "It's over. It's finally over." That night, I polished the front window and installed a new plaque above the door. Simple, carved into a piece of cedar wood, letters burned in by hand. She remembered who she was, and the game changed. A week later, a man walked in during the mid-morning lull. He had salt and pepper hair, a tired jacket, and a pot of rosemary in his hands. He looked around, took in the light and the warmth and the scent, then turned to me with a quiet curiosity. "Stillroot?" he asked, motioning toward the sign. "What does that mean?" I smiled, wiped my hands on my apron, and brushed a bit of dirt off a potted fern. "It means," I said, meeting his gaze, "that even things buried deep still find a way to grow." Sometimes the loudest form of power is quiet. Not revenge shouted from rooftops, but truth spoken once and documented well. Abby didn't need to burn everything down. She simply stepped out of the fire and let the smoke speak for itself. What would you do if your own family stood in silence while you were betrayed? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true, raw, and unforgettable stories like this.